And good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's CPD session with Alan Bull on a professional guide to post-production photographic techniques. We're delighted to have Alan here. He took part in our CPD session in the autumn with Historic England and kindly agreed to come back and talk today. Alan has an MA in film and media production and has worked as an architectural photographer since graduating in photography over 30 years ago. He's worked on award-winning productions and documentaries. His photographic work has been published by The Times, The Guardian, The Daily Telegraph, English Heritage, Historic England, National Geographic, Architects Journal, Royal Mail, Ford, and the British Journal of Photography. Saying all of that in one breath is quite a mouthful. He teaches architectural photography to students at Oxford and Oxford Brookes universities too. Alan works for Historic England, supplying terrestrial and drone, both still and moving imagery for all departments. He is Historic England's only architectural photographer and is based in the north of England, covering over 14,500 square miles. So, Alan, please, over to you.
Great, thank you, Elena. Right, this is going to be a quick whistle-stop tour of how I go about doing my post-production. There are numerous ways of doing the same thing, numerous programs, but I'm going to show you how to process in Photoshop today and its browser bridge. So just to start off with, when you've taken your photographs on your drone, ideally, you'll have shot them as raw files. So this gives you a lot of color information and luminance information so that you can pull back and process your pictures more effectively than if you'd have shot in JPEG, which I don't recommend. Now, when you upgrade or reinstall your firmware on your drones, it could be that your drone goes back to factory settings and it might well choose JPEG as its shooting format, which I would overrule. Always shoot a raw file. And in the color profile setting, you need to be choosing Adobe 1998 RGB files. So it's a big color space, which you can then process for publication or web, but it gives you a wide, great sort of almost like a music score to work from. If you shoot sRGB, which is the sort of antithesis of the Adobe RGB files, you'll end up with a much smaller amount of color information and is not recommended. Now the DJI drones do, if they default to JPEG, they will shoot in sRGB, which unless you're only going to be showing your images on the web, I wouldn't recommend. So always shoot raw files. When you download the images from your drone, don't do it straight from the drone to your computer, because this involves the drone having to process as well to get those images off. Take the card out of the drone, put it into a card reader, and then plug that card reader into your computer and download your images that way. And we always save onto an external drive and back them up at least once, so that if there's a hiccup anywhere, you've got a second copy. So I think I'll just talk a little bit now about the actual room that I process in. So I have a blackout blind when I'm processing, which is always down. So there's no sunshine coming in. Daylight bulb, so color temperature 5,500 Kelvin, always have that. Always blackout blind down. And no matter what time of year or what time of day, everything is consistent. So my eyes are just tuned into the image on the screen. There's no taking the daylight outside into account and colors coming off the grass into the room, that type of thing. So it's always consistent. And okay, Elena, I think now just I can go into the actual program and do a run through of how I work.
Okay, so I'll be using a Mac today, but Adobe Photoshop is perfectly good on a PC. They don't differ too much. So if I open up Bridge, which is the browser for Photoshop, that's
Alan, you just need to share your screen, please.
Aha.
Perfect. That's great. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you. So Bridge is the Adobe Photoshop browser, which we go into in the first instance. Every time we download images or upload images, it's our first port of call. So if you're using a Mac and you can't see Bridge on the taskbar at the bottom, you can just go up to the top right and use this really handy search tool, magnifying glass, and type in Bridge, and it will find where your program is. And similarly on a PC, you can just go into where your programs are and open that up. So Bridge is really useful for selecting your images in the first instance, numbering them. You can differentiate different file types. So if I want to see just the JPEGs, I can go down to Filter here and just see the JPEGs. Camera raw images, these were shot on a Canon SLR, DNG, so these will be the raw files shot on a DJI drone. So it's a very quick, useful way of differentiating which images you want to work on. So initially, I'm going to have a look through here and open up a raw file from a DJI drone. Now, when we open up a raw file from Bridge, it automatically takes us into the preliminary section of Photoshop, which is called Camera Raw. So it's only generally used for looking at raw files, but it's very good for making broad changes. So in the first instance, we'll go down to the middle here and ensure that the color space is Adobe RGB 1998 and 16 bits of depth. It's very important because if we work on a smaller file, it'll already be throwing information out which we do not want. Okay, so this is Thornton Manor in the Wirral, which had a fire last year, and I was asked to go and record it. So this is a really good example of showing you exposures and shadow detail. So when we expose on our cameras, you'll have a thing that looks like this histogram in the top right corner. So the left-hand edge refers to any shadow detail. The right-hand edge refers to highlight detail and information. There are two little toggle boxes here. So make sure these are toggled on so that you can see anything that's overexposed that has no detail comes up with red banding like this. So then you know you're in the right area. And conversely, if you darken it down, you'll get areas which are pure black with no information. And there's a lot, obviously, there of areas with pure black, which we do not want. So generally, have this so it looks correct. I'm using a color calibrated monitor. I've got an ISO monitor, but you can buy things called color monkeys, and there are various other color grading and color calibrating units on the market. So if you just Google color calibration units for monitors, you'll see the range that's out there. And all that does, it puts a program with different colors on, and there's a sensor that sits on the screen, and it calibrates everything so that what you see is what you get, which is what we're looking for. So in this instance, it's quite important to show the area that's burnt out So if I, in Camera Raw, just go to the shadows area, bring the slider up, you can see a lot more information than we did when it was lowered down. So because it's all about that information on this image, I would recommend lifting the shadows up. Now it does lift the shadows for the whole image, which we don't particularly want, but this is a good starting point so that we can see down into the building. Okay, I wouldn't do much else generally in Camera Raw. Maybe to set the color balance, but we'll talk about that a bit later. If you've shot a RAW file, you can change the color temperature quite quickly. So if you'd made a mistake and you'd shot it on a tungsten balanced color profile, you can easily turn it around. And that's the same with film cameras that shoot RAW files, like RED cameras that shoot RAW files. They're very flexible files. Okay, so we don't put any sharpening on at all in anything. So I'm going to open this up, and this is going to take me into Camera Raw proper. So looking at this, I can see what's wrong with it. It's slightly squiff if we look at the top edge. So I'm going to go through, adjust the lightness, the contrast, saturation, and then I'm going to rotate it ever so slightly to square things up. So if we go to Window up here, the things I'd like to see on my desktop are adjustments, probably history, so we can go back a couple of steps, and what else might I like to see? Layers. We use layers all the time, and hopefully I'll explain why that is. So to start with, we always set the levels. So we go into this little icon, this little graph, histogram icon here. If you press the Alt key on your keyboard, and I think it's the same on a Mac and a PC, and you grab this little box. It's not doing that. Seems to be a problem with this. I don't know why it's not doing that. If you grab the slider with the Alt key down, it'll show you some masking. I don't know why my cursor's disappeared. I'm just going to close Photoshop down and open it up again. This isn't good. Now I'm having a problem here. The cursor won't do what it's supposed to do.
Okay.
Right. I think I might have to turn the computer off and crash it and start again and see if that's going to help. Is that okay, Lana?
That's absolutely fine. Don't worry.
Yeah.
I will pause recording for a moment because obviously we don't need to see you go through this.
Okay, right. I'll be back shortly.
Lovely.
Been doing. This is a good example where your cursor just vanishes and it won't access anything. It's because you've been doing lots of work previously, and the cache has built up and it's stopped anything happening. So if you go in Bridge, go into Preferences, go into the cache, and then purge all the caches and the previews and all the little files it's made and kept. Purge all that, you don't need it, and then it will come back to life. That's a great fortuitous time for that to have happened, actually. So here we go. So I'm going to press Alt, click on the left-hand edge, and we're looking for the slightest bit of coloured masking. That shows us areas of shadow which have no detail. So we want the tiniest speck that end, and then we come up to the highlights end, and still with the Alt key down, click on the highlights slider, and we can see already that there's the tiniest bit of masking there. So that means you've got a good black point and a good white point set. Once you've done that, you can slide the midtones slider, and on a calibrated monitor, what you see in theory is what you get published. So that looks pretty good to me. So I'm now going to go into this little icon here, which is curves. So this relates to contrast. This midpoint here is a middle tone grey, which is the sort of grey around the this box here. It's the grey that my wall was. So it's a mid-tone, halfway between black and white. So if I lift this top area of the curve upwards, anything lighter than that grey tone will get lighter. And if I lift that down, it'll darken anything that's lighter than that grey. So this is how we affect the contrast. So the top half of the curve affects the highlights, the bottom half of the curve affects the shadow area. So we're looking for a nice, smooth, gentle curve, nothing more than you can see there generally. That's increased the contrast. If the image is really contrasty to start with, and we want to reduce the contrast, we make an inverse S shape on that graph. And that's been the case forever since film was invented. The more development you gave it, the steeper this curve would be. So Elena, when you were in school doing your processing, the longer you left it in the developer, the more your negatives were doing this when put through a testing machine. So we're going for the very slightest curve. Now in Photoshop, when this curve is adjusted, it also does affect the color somewhat. So when I do a curve, I go into layers, where it says normal here, we want to click luminosity. And that ensures that only the luma values are affected. So the highlights and the shadows, there's no color information affected. And certainly if you put a curve on where there's a lot of stonework, it can go really ugly very quickly. So try and keep in mind that a luminosity curve is a more neutral looking thing to use. Once I've done that, I'll go into saturation. And when I'm shooting for guidebooks or publication that's going to be using CMYK subtractive colored inks in a printing house, I will generally add a few units of saturation, and I've found 4 units to be pretty good, so that it ups the contrast here, but when it's printed, the saturation is reduced slightly and it will bring it back to looking normal. I've done maybe 30 guidebooks for English heritage. And over time, I've found that 4 units, it gives you the kind of neutral, accurate representation that you're looking for. So sometimes if you're shooting for the web, you might not need to do that. What you see on the screen is how it's going to be. There is a way of doing a proofing. So if I'm doing this for a printed book and I go into Command, it should show me somewhere, Command Y, it should say at the top. It'll give you the look of how that image is going to be reproduced. Although it doesn't alter the file, it just shows you how it will look reproduced. Okay, so we've altered the levels, the curves, the saturation, and each of those processes has its own layer, which you can turn off. So I can turn off the contrast layer. This is a really good way of working on your images without causing any destruction to the information. So you can go back in if you want and readjust just contrast or just the saturation rather than working on a whole image at once. So this is called layering, layers. And when we save the files, we always flatten this, which is what I'm going to do now. So I'm going to flatten the image and show you quickly how to rotate it. So go image rotation arbitrary. I can see it's slightly spun clockwise, and generally when the pictures are out and I need to adjust them, I'll start off with 0.3 of a degree, and that usually is the margin of error for when I've shot things, whether it's on a tripod or a drone. That tends to be the margin. If that doesn't work, I'll go with that same rotation again. So we're now up to 0.6 of a degree. You can see there are little black edges now where it will need cropping, but that looks fairly straightened up. So if we go into the crop tool now on the left-hand side, crop tool, you can keep the aspect ratio the same. If you press Shift, you can bring in the corner bars, the corner toggles, and it will keep the original ratio that it was shot in. Or you can just drag one side in, so you can create square images as well if you need to. So that's cropped. And then I will save this. So make sure it's flattened. So just have a quick look that it's flat. Flatten the image. Now we're going to change it from a 16-bit file, because we've shot a nice, big, beautiful raw file to start with. And we're going to save it as an 8-bit file. So video file, save as. Have a good look at the formats that the computer's trying to save it as and ensure that it's a TIFF. This is a lossless file. It's much more stable than other files for archiving record. So make sure it's going into the right folder as well. Sometimes things can go awry and end up in random folders. Press save. This comes up as a default now, so no compression, interleaved, RGB, that's good. And even though you might be working on a Mac, save it as an IBM PC file so that picture libraries that use PCs and other people can actually see the file. And that should be it. That's saved. So now we're going to go, it should be saved. Yep, a bit of time lag. So we're going to close and go to bridge. And then we're on to the next image. So generally, I do this time and time again, and not much more than that. I'll just show you a little bit about using a grey card. So this colour card is quite a good thing. You can photograph one of these as you take off And as long as the light stays the same, you can use one shot of this color card to correct a whole batch of images, so they're all the right color match. So if we open these two, okay, so I've opened the batch of images that have got the same lighting. So it might be a studio shoot, could be anything you do with a drone, and I'm going to click on this pipette at the top right. So even if you've got made a mistake and you've shot your image as a fluorescent lighting or tungsten or something in daylight, you can correct this with a RAW file. So click on the pipette, come in, and any of that column of white to black squares, you can tap on, and it will ensure that that bit you've tapped on is made up of equal parts of red, blue, and green, RGB, red, green, blue. So that's color corrected for daylight now, because we've clicked on that. So don't worry about the colors. We're just looking at the neutral column. So once that's corrected, we can go down to the bottom, select the second image or the whole batch of images, go right click, sync settings, and then you can choose in here what you sync, the curves, all sorts of things in Camera Raw. So I'm just going to say check all, for argument's sake, press OK. And then you can see that image on the bottom left that was blue and tungsten-y has been color corrected from the grey card. That's me doing the dishes in a wartime kitchen that served 2 million soldiers coming through the Midlands on their way home. Okay, so that was that color correction. And then I'd go through the same process again with levels and curves and saturation, but I'll show you some more techniques. Don't save. Correcting verticals. This is possibly something that you'll be doing a lot of the time. As you'll be looking down on buildings, you can see we've got these converging verticals, which might be what you're after. I know the photogrammetry, geospatial people don't want any corrections whatsoever when you shoot photos for them. They just want it straight, as a prime lens would see. But sort of photographers like ourselves do quite like to have the verticals corrected. So in this case, I'm just going to open this up in Photoshop proper. I'll go Command, minus, and then probably minus again, because we're going to be using the outside edge space. To get a grid on that image on a Mac, you press Command and then either letter H or apostrophe. And then we go into Command again, and then the letters JT, one straight after the other. Hold the Command key down. And we're just going to hold that little toggle and pull it out. So pull it out a little bit at a time on each side. Don't do one great big movement on one side and then the other, because it'll look a bit odd. So if the building was upright, this now gives an accurate representation of that building having upright walls. So, okay, hit return, lose the mask, let's make it a little bit bigger. So guidebooks and other publications might not want people in. So it would be one of the few instances that we might remove them for a guidebook, and we might not. But if we were to do so, we would, I'll show you from here, go layer, flatten the image. I'll just show you how to take those people out. So you go Commands, plus, plus, and you come over here to the left to the little icon that looks like a handbag or a swag bag. And then you can see when we hover over this character and touch on the mouse of the tablet, we can rub over them and it averages out the area that's around that person. So we're not copying any areas, we're just hovering over and the software will average it out. So that's a good way for taking out dust specks in the sky, random people, but we're very careful and mindful not to remove anything that is an architectural feature. So it might even be an ugly phone line that doesn't look good, but we leave all that in because we're making pure records as opposed to images that only just look nice. Okay, so let's get rid of that. Let's save as. Save as a TIFF. File. Close and go to Bridge. I'll find the shot where we're going to do yeah, let's do this one here. So Morecambe Winter Gardens. I did some interior flying as a record after they just spent £680,000 redoing the plasterwork, but there was a mosaic entrance that they wanted recording. And the only real way to do that was with a drone. So it's low level, it's only about 2 meters up, but using the lighting that was coming in from the top of the image, that's the daylight coming in from the front door. And then on the bottom, it was very much lit by interior lighting from the main auditorium. So I didn't have a lot of time to shoot this job because there was a lot to get through. So I couldn't light anything very well. So I just used the lighting that was available. So this is an instance where I had upgraded the firmware on the drone and it reset everything to shooting JPEGs. So I'll show you. This shot it as an sRGB, which we didn't want. So convert it to an Adobe file. Ideally, you'd save this as a TIFF first before you started working. But for now, I'm just going to show you how you can alter certain areas of an image and alter color casts if you've got mixed lighting in your image. So we'll get a basic shadows and highlights. There we go, slightest bit of banding there. And then I'm going to affect the midtones. We'll bring that up slightly. So in this instance, we're really looking for detail, for information for asking for grant money, really. So we want to see what's damaged, what's had a bodge repair like we've got here. So we're not looking for an amazing picture. This one is a pure reference image. So done levels, go to curves, and this looks like an image which one overall sweeping curve is not going to help us much. So I'm going to show you how to make a selection here. I'm going to just flatten this down first. And then I'm going to make a selection over here with this tool. So I tend to use the polygonal lasso tool. And I'm going to select areas that aren't nicely lit with the daylight. And I'm going to lift these and make them a little bit lighter. So you go tap, tap, tapping around the edge of the image. And then when you get near to where you started, if you double click, it will join up. Now, I always tend to start off with the feathering at the top left here at 200 pixels, because it gives you a nice soft edge. Go into the curves, and I'm going to again make sure that's a luminosity curve. And I'm going to just lift those areas up ever so slightly, so we can see now a little bit better. And it's the tones. Okay, there is light coming through the windows and things here, but that's not too bad. Now there is a slight shift in the color across the image from daylight at the top to some sort of tungsten-y energy saving bulb. I'm not quite sure what that was. So it looks a bit orangey red. So I'm going to make another selection. Come down here to the bits that look a bit more orangey red. And I'm just going to alter the color balance by coming into here. What is it? In here, bottom right. And that's looking slightly warm, slightly red. So if I mean, these are marginal little changes. It's very hard to know. And it might be that they're sort of fluorescent tubes with odd colors going on. So fluorescent tubes make your images green. So by reducing the green here, that seems to have helped somewhat. But there could be all kinds of what we call cross curves with different colors going on at the same time that make it fairly hard to correct. So I'm going to say that's pretty good. I'm going to just open up this area here and make it a little bit lighter. So again, I'll make a selection. Go to curves. So this mosaic's usually covered up with a carpet that they just pulled back while I was there. And I don't think the people working there have even seen this floor before. So you can up the contrast ever so slightly. That's pretty good. Now you can see here, there seems to be some not vertical lines. There's some sort of barreling or pin cushion effect going on. Maybe because of the optics, maybe because of the angle I've shot. It's not exactly vertical, but I'm going to show you how to try and correct some of those elements as well. So layer, flatten. Then if we go into filter, and then lens correction. Custom. And then here we've got barrel distortion and pin cushion distortion. So you want to make your slider go in the direction of the way you'd like the image to look more like. So I think it's going in the middles. So you'd like it to be a little bit more barreled. So these are very slight, tiny movements. And you might not always get the tops and bottoms doing what you want. So it might help one side, but not the other. So it's a bit hit and miss, really. So I'm going to go Command minus, make it a tiny bit smaller. And that looks better down the edges than it did. So I'm going to say OK to that. And then I don't think there's much we can do top and bottom on this image with getting that line of tiles absolutely right. We can go Command JT, maybe pull this bottom out of fraction. That line of dark tiles might be important. It might not. If it's not so important, maybe you can just take it off. Just pull this one down ever so slightly. Okay, and then once you've got the selection that you're after, hit return. And then it's cropped. I'm just going to lighten up this top right corner. It's got no light on it at all. Again, handy curves. And pull that up until we've sort of evened out the lighting. Okay, and I'd be happy with that to send off to somebody as a reference image as to what needs to be done. Okay, so I'm going to flatten that layer, flatten the image. 8 bits. Yeah, this is already 8 bits because the drone shot it as a JPEG, because I wasn't paying enough attention at the time. So unfortunately, I shot it as a JPEG, so it's already started off as an 8-bit. And then we're going to save that file, save as. Now this image doesn't look too bad, even though it was shot as a JPEG. Other images, sorry, I should have saved that as a TIFF. Other images such as this one, which was a JPEG in really poor lighting conditions, really do start to fall apart very, very quickly. So this is why you don't shoot sRGB JPEGs. I go into levels, Alt, shadow, and then if I try to bring up the shadows, and I'll just lift the contrast up as well very slightly, you will see just how little information there is in this JPEG, and this looks awful. And when I zoom in, you can see that the software is putting in all kinds of random pinkies and pinks and greens and just blotchy colours. Like there's a sort of purple cast in here, green here. It's all blocked off because it's trying to make as small a file as possible with as little information as possible, and it's just basically doing a polyfiller job. So if that had been shot as a raw file, you'd have a much smoother gradation of both the luma values and the colour. So yeah, horrible JPEGs. So close that one down. I won't save that. Never want to see that again. Browse and bridge. File. Browse and bridge. Yeah, an example here of a building which is actually pretty wonky. So it's important to really look at the building when you're photographing it, just to see whether the entrance is vertical or not. So that's quite important, because I might just assume that I've got it slightly off and correct that, whereas in actual fact that is sloping off to the left at the top. So have a good look before you do your images. What else can I show you? Darkening skies, that's quite a good one. Let's use this. So again, this is on the infamous JPEG setting. Actually, I won't show you that one. I'll show you a different image. I'll show you this one here. So this is a renovated barn. So this is a good example. I'm just going to bring the, so we're really looking at the sky in this, so I can show you how to darken down a slightly bright sky without affecting the top of the building in any way. So in Camera Raw, we go to this little circle icon at the top right, click on that, and I've actually done this before, so it's not giving me the option I wanted. But if you click on here, anything which is shown in pink will be affected. So when I come in here, you can see it's lightening or darkening, but it's not, it shouldn't be affecting the building, top of the building, or any foliage. So it's a good way of darkening the sky without darkening down treetops. So you can use highlights, whites, exposure, So that's a very good tool for darkening down skies. I'll just see if I've got another image I can show you that with as well. And you can also do it with objects if you're shooting an object that you want to cut out from a background. It's very good at selecting coins and things and only selecting the subject. Let's okay, you can open up a TIFF file in Camera Raw by going Command R. As a bit of a cheat. So normally it's only raw files which are allowed to go in, but that's a good way of getting a TIFF in. And here we go. Click on that white icon again, and because I've not done this before on this image, I can click Sky. There's the subject one we talked about, which is very good too. So Sky, and it just does a good job of selecting the sky. So we can either darken down the whole sky or go the other way, or we can, within that sky selection, choose in here, intersect with a linear gradient. And then when we start at the top with this little cross in the middle, press the Shift key. We're going to slide this down, and we're going to make a graduated sky. In the past, it would have darkened everything down, the sky, the top of the building. But now, with this feature, it will only affect the sky area. So you can darken down sky without affecting the subject. So this is really useful if you're going to put text on or something. You could put a text box in here, which I'll do now. So I'll just open that up in Photoshop. And then if we want to put text on, there's a text box tool here. And then, so there we go. So it's just like using any sort of word or design package. There we go. That's that. Again, flatten it down. Layer. We would look for dust and just use the little tool here for that, but that's already been done for that. So I've got an image. Sorry, file, save as. And because I've worked on this before, it's decided to save as a Photoshop file, which we don't particularly want for the archive. RGB TIFF, replace that. Okay. We didn't flatten it, but that's okay. Right. I'll just show you now how to make JPEGs from those TIFFs. So we do use JPEGs a lot for online work. So we'll go down to the TIFF section here and go Command A. That selects all the finished TIFFs that we've done today. I'm going to go to Tools and Photoshop Image Processor. And don't just save them in the same folder, which it often asks you because it's a bit cheeky and it will just put them anywhere it wants. So even if it is the same folder, I'd recommend choosing it yourself because it can go a bit awry. You can convert them to sRGB if they're only going to be used online. I generally go for a quality of 7, and when I do save the JPEGs, I put this what's called a high pass filter, and it just accentuates the sharpness ever so slightly on images which are only going to be used online. So we don't do this if they're going to the publishers, because the publishers like to put the sharpening on from 0, and they've done that from the word dot with film. When they've scanned it, they've put their own number of units of sharpening on, which is part of their printing process. If you've got over-sharpened images, they will go very crystally looking around the edges, and they're really ugly. So I shot the Cumbria Pevsner a few years ago on really nice big transparency film. So they scanned it and really sharpened it, and well, I can't even look at the book because it's so crusty around the edges that it's gone awful. So be careful with sharpening. But for JPEGs for online high pass, let's go run, and that's going to convert all those TIFFs, which the archive are going to get. So we've got medium to good sized JPEGs. Okay, and then I'm going to show you how to do a contact sheet as well. File, as in Bridge. So generally, I use a program called Breeze Browser for doing my captioning, cataloging, and numbering. Doesn't work on a Mac, only a PC, but you can put all that metadata onto your images in Bridge by going into Tools, and then you create a template and then add your information, copyright information in there. But for now, I'm just going to show you quickly in the last couple of minutes how to do a contact sheet for sending out to clients. So you select your images, and just need to get to the top there. In this top little section, we've got output. So all selected, you just drag those onto the template. There we go. So I've got 2 pages of everything that we've wanted to save there. And do use a header. So I put down the job number, ours are generally 2K, something, and then we'd say what it is. Attempt to center that. But I do copy this while it's in that box there. So Command C, I'll show you why in a moment. And then come down and put the footer on, which will be the copyright. The copyright symbol on a Mac is Alt and then letter G. Then you get a little copyright symbol, and ours would say Historic England Archive. And when you come down to export the PDF, that's why I copied the first line, so I can go Command V, or that doesn't work. So if you go right click, paste, that puts in what that is going to be called. Save that, and then it creates a lovely PDF for us, which we can retransfer to our clients. This can be either your finished work, your finished TIFFs, so they can see at a glance. It might be all the raw files from a 2-day shoot, and then they will select which ones they'd like you to process. So it's a very good, quick way of showing people what you've got in the bag and what to work on. Close this. Close ARPAS. So it's, yeah, really important to back things up so you don't lose anything. And drives do stop working, as I'm sure you found out. But largely that's what we'll do time and time again. And I don't do much else. There's no image composites or anything like that. That's pretty well it. Just do one last image. This is just before Christmas. This is an Italian prisoner of war camp just outside Sheffield, and just wanted to show the plinth in the snow because it was much more visible than it is normally, because you can see these edge bits. So I did this for a potential Christmas card for Historic England for next year. They wanted something that wasn't too religious, too churchy, but seasonal and with historic elements. And these two girls just happened to walk through for me. So I was very lucky. Alt key, slide to find a black. There we go. Flatten. And image mode. So this was shot as a raw file on drone, which is good, 16 bits. Sorry, I'm going to change that to 8 bits. The archive, RGB 8-bit file, save as, and then save. And that's pretty well is my workflow for Photoshop. So I think I can probably hand back over to Elena now and take any questions anybody's got. Do feel free to email me if you've got any questions. If you really want to know massively in depth about how to use Photoshop or Lightroom, there's a really good book by Focal Press by Martin Evening, who does a lot of sort of fashion work. So the photos are sort of quite glitzy, but he's the go-to person for real in-depth knowledge in Photoshop, and he's been a beta tester for Adobe for a number of years. So that's a really good book to get. There's other things online. There's a chap called, his website's just called Flern, that's in PH, Learn, and he'll show you techniques beyond the types of things that I've been showing you today. So yeah, both of those you can learn lots from. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Alan. That was a lot of detail indeed in there. And I don't know about anybody else, but I've learned an awful lot, which is all to the good. Thank you very much indeed. If anyone has questions, please do pop them into the Q&A. Thank you also for the details of those 2 further books as well. And I'll get the exact details off you later on, Alan, if I may, and we'll include those details of how to order them in the follow-up email that I'll send out after this. Lovely. So, have we got any questions? Has anyone, does anyone want to ask anything? Or have you absorbed everything and think that you are all set? I have to admit, while we have this wonderful picture of the castle up ahead of us, was this taken at the time of the Queen's death by any chance? The flag at half-mast?
Yes, it was. So it was just fortuitous, really. I'd been down in South Wales mountain biking when she died, and then I was up in Cumbria to do these guidebooks, and it just so happened that when I was booked in to do the guidebooks, because the light was looking like it was going to be good, yeah, the flag was at half-mast. So I thought it was quite a nice historic record, really. Whether or not it's the image that they'll want on the guidebook cover is another matter, because they might not want that, they might. But that's for them to decide, and either take the flag out in Photoshop or leave it, or I go back. I don't know, but it was a nice moment, really.
Are you able to just move it up the pole? We didn't ask this actually.
Yes.
Is it sort of possible in that sense to sort of take something small like that and just change its position?
Yes, it is. Yes, you can use a clone tool, or there's a thing called a patch tool. You could just select that and put it at the top.
Ah, there you are.
Yes.
So we have a question from Roger. What was the name of the function you used to remove people, dust, etc., please?
Yes. Okay. So can you still see my screen?
We can, yes.
Yeah, right. So on the left-hand side, there's a little thing that looks like a swag bag, and it's called the Spot Healing Brush Tool. It's a really, really good thing. Spot Healing Brush Tool. And you affect its size by using the square bracket keys.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Thank you very much indeed. That's very useful.
If you're going to take a speck off the sensor near an edge, I'll show you a quick way to do that. Let me find something here. Oh, there's a bird here. That's good. Right, so this tool might not be good for removing that bird there because it's got sky and stonework. So if we come down to this tool here, the clone stamp, which used to be a go-to thing a long time ago. I'll just flatten this down. Yeah, you can only do this when the image is flat. If there's lots of layers, you can't do it. So the clone tool used to be the only crude tool for doing this kind of thing, but it still has its place. So if we select a little bit of sky that we want to replicate near where that bird is, we go near the bird, press the Alt key, pick the area we would like to copy, tap on the screen, move over the bird, and then very gently just move the mouse or the stylus around and the bird will be removed. Now you can adjust the flow and the opacity up here to get this kind of thing you're after. So I'll just remove this other one. So Alt, click on the sky we would like to replicate, and then very gently, just in a couple of goes, we can just take that bird out there. So that's a way of removing things on edges, and there are always going to be pigeons and things on edges.
They do get everywhere.
They do. So we don't make a habit of removing much, but things like ducks and swans and birds in the sky, we would tend to remove those either by cropping them out or ideally waiting until they're not there when you take the image. But yeah, generally tend to remove extraneous bits. So we spend our lives moving wheelie bins and cones and hairdresser signs and all manner of horrible things. Rather than doing it in Photoshop, we'll actually get in and move those things and then put them all back afterwards. So it can take a lot of time.
Yes, I understand that. Yes, absolutely. And that's mainly because it distracts from the actual picture and what you're trying to show. Yes,
and if we're showing sort of street furniture, we'll include as much of that as possible. Depends what the brief is. So, yes.
Indeed, indeed. Now, do we have any more questions? I'll give you a moment or so to have a think about it, everyone. And if not, then I will thank Alan in due course. Obviously, thank you, Alan, because that's fascinating to have watched all of that. And I've learned an awful lot. We will make this available on the ARPAS-UK website. So if a colleague of yours has missed it, or if you would like to share it, please do so. This is all to help the professionalism of those within the drone industry and to help you with your work. So we haven't had any more questions through, so I think we'll leave it there. If you do find you have more afterwards, I will ensure that Alan gives me the details of the 2 extra resources that he mentioned. And when we send out the follow-up email, we'll include those details. And if you have further questions after that, Alan, may I forward people on to you?
Yes, please.
That's okay?
Yes.
Lovely. Yes. Thank you very much indeed. What a fascinating discussion. Indeed. Well, thank you very much, everyone. Thank you for giving up your time to come and watch this and join us. Do keep an eye out on the ARPAS-UK /CPD page as well for further CPD sessions coming up. Thank you very much indeed then, and I shall close the session in a second. Thank you very much then. Okay, goodbye.
Thank you.